Little Mrs. Summers one day found herself the unexpected possessor of $15. It seemed to her a very large amount of money, and the way in which it stuffed and bulged in her worn purse gave her a feeling of importance, such as she had not enjoyed for years. The question of investment was one that occupied her greatly. For a day or two she walked about apparently in a dreamy state, but really absorbed in the speculation and calculation. She did not wish to act hastily, to do anything she might afterward regret. But it was during the still hours of the night, when she lay awake, revolving plans in her head, that she seemed to see her way clearly toward a proper and judicious use of the money. $1 or $2 could be added to the price usually paid for Janie's shoes, which would ensure their lasting an appreciable time longer than they usually did. She would buy so and so many yards of percale for the new shirtwaists of the boys and Janie and Mag. She had intended to make the old ones by doing skillful patching. Mag should have another gown. She had seen some beautiful patterns, veritable bargains in the shop windows, and still there would have been left enough for new stockings, 2 pairs apiece. And what darning that would have saved for a while. She would get caps for the boys and sailor hats for the girls. The vision of her little brood looking fresh and dainty and new for once in their lives excited her and made her feel restless and wakeful with anticipation. The neighbours sometimes talked of certain better days that little Mrs. Summers had known before she had ever thought of being Mrs. Summers. She herself indulged in no such morbid retrospection. She had no time, no second of time to devote to the past. The needs of the present absorbed her every faculty. A vision of the future, like some dim, gaunt monster, sometimes appalled her. But luckily, tomorrow never comes. Mrs. Summers was one who knew the value of a bargain, who could stand for hours making her way inch by inch towards the desired object that was selling below cost. She could elbow her way in if need be. She had learned to clutch a piece of goods and hold it and stick to it with persistence and determination till her time came to be served, no matter when it came. But that day she was a little faint and tired. She had swallowed a light luncheon. No, when she came to think of it, between getting the children fed and the place righted and preparing herself for the shopping bout, she had actually forgotten to eat any luncheon at all. She sat herself upon a revolving stool before the counter that was comparatively deserted, trying to gather the courage to push through the crowd of shoppers packed around the piles of shirts and patterned cotton. An all-gone limp feeling had come over her, and she rested her hand aimlessly on the counter. She wore no gloves. By degrees she grew aware that her hand had encountered something very soothing, very pleasant to touch. She looked down to see that her hand lay upon a pile of silk stockings. A placard nearby announced that they had been reduced in price from $2.50 to $1.98, and a young girl who stood behind the counter asked her if she wished to examine their line of silk hosiery. She smiled, just as if she had been asked to inspect a tiara of diamonds with the ultimate view of purchasing. But she went on feeling the soft, sheeny, luxurious things, with both hands now, holding them up to see them glisten, and to feel them glide serpent-like through her fingers. 2 hectic blotches suddenly came on her pale cheeks. She looked up at the girl. "Do you think there are any 8.5s among these?" There were any number of 8.5. In fact, there were more of that size than any other. Here was a light blue pair. There were some with lavender, some all black with various shades of tan and grey. Mrs. Summers selected a black pair and looked at them very long and closely. She pretended to be examining the texture, which the clerk assured her was excellent. $1.98, she mused aloud. Well, I'll take this pair. She handed the girl a $5 bill and waited for her change and for her parcel. What a very small parcel it was. It seemed lost in the depths of her shabby old shopping bag. Mrs. Summers after that did not move in the direction of the bargain counter. She took to the elevator, which carried her to the upper floor into the region of the ladies' waiting rooms. Here, in a retired corner, she exchanged her cotton stockings for the new silk ones, which she had just bought. She was not going through any acute mental process or reasoning with herself. Nor was she striving to explain to her satisfaction the motive of her action. She was not thinking at all. She seemed for the time to be taking a rest from that laborious and fatiguing function, and to have abandoned herself to some mechanical impulse that directed her actions and freed her from responsibility. How good was the touch of raw silk to her flesh! She felt like laying back in the cushioned chair and revelling in it for a while of luxury. She did for a little while, and then she replaced her shoes, rolled the cotton stockings together and thrust them into her bag. After doing this, she crossed straight over to the shoe department and took her seat to be fitted. She was fastidious. The clerk could not make her out. He could not reconcile her shoes with her stockings, and she was not too easily pleased. She held back her skirt and turned her feet one way and then the other, and she glanced down at the polished pointed tip boots. Her foot and ankle looked very pretty. She could not realize that they belonged to her or were part of herself. She wanted an excellent stylish fit, she told the young fellow who served her, and she did not mind the difference of $1 or $2 more in the price as long as she got what she desired. It was a long time since Mrs. Summers had been fitted for gloves. On rare occasions when she had bought a pair, they were always bargains, so cheap that it would have been preposterous and unreasonable to have expected them to be fitted to the hand. Now she rested her elbow on the cushion of the glove counter, and a pretty, pleasant young creature, delicate and deft to the touch, drew a long-wristed kid over Mrs. Summers' hand. She smoothed it down to the wrist and buttoned it neatly, and both of them lost themselves for a second or two admiring the contemplation of the little symmetrical glove hand. But there were other places where the money might have been spent. There were books and magazines piled up in the window of a stall a few paces down the street. Mrs. Summers bought 2 high-priced magazines, such as she had been accustomed to read in the days when she had been accustomed to other pleasant things. She carried them without wrapping. As well as she could, she lifted up her skirt at the crossing. Her stockings and boots and well-fitted gloves had worked marvels in her bearing, had given her a feeling of assurance, a sense of belonging to the well-dressed multitude. She was very hungry. Another time she would have stilled the craving for food until she reached her own home, where she would have been able to brew herself up a cup of tea and taken a snack of anything that was available. But the impulse that was guiding her would not suffer to entertain any such thought. There was a restaurant at the corner. She had never entered its doors. From the outside she had sometimes caught glimpses of the spotless damask and shining crystal, and soft-stepping waiters serving people of fashion. When she entered, her appearance created no surprise, no consternation, as she half feared it might. She seated herself at a small table alone, and an attentive waiter at once approached her to take her order. She did not want a profusion. She craved a nice tasty bite. 6 blue points, a plump chop with cress, and something sweet, a creme frappée, for instance, a glass of Rhine wine, and after all, a small cup of black coffee. While waiting to be served, she removed her gloves very leisurely and laid them beside her. She picked up a magazine and glanced through it, cutting the pages with the blunt edge of a knife. It was all very agreeable. The damask was even more spotless than it had been through the window, and the crystal more sparkling. There were quiet ladies and gentlemen who did not notice her, lunching at small tables like her own. A soft, pleasing strain of music could be heard, and a gentle breeze was blowing through the window. She tasted a bite, and she read a word or two, and then she sipped her amber wine and wiggled her toes in her silk stockings. The price of it made no difference. She counted the money out by the waiter and left an extra coin on his tray, whereupon he bowed before her as if she was a princess of royal blood. There was still money in her purse, and her next temptation presented itself in the shape of a matinee poster. The play had begun, and the house seemed to her to be packed. But there were vacant seats here and there, and into one of them she was ushered, between brilliantly dressed women who gone there to kill time and eat candy and display their gaudy attire. There were many others who were there solely for the play and acting. It is safe to say there was no one present who bore quite the attitude Mrs. Summers did to her surroundings. She gathered in the whole stage and players and people in one wide impression, and absorbed it and enjoyed it. She laughed at the comedy and wept. She and the gaudy woman next to her wept over the tragedy, and they talked a little together over it. Then the gaudy woman wiped her eyes and sniffled on a tiny square of filmy, perfumed lace, and passed little Miss Summers her box of candy. The play was over, the music ceased, the crowd filed out. It was like a dream ended. People scattered in all directions. Mrs. Summers went to the corner and waited for the cable car. A man with keen eyes who sat opposite her seemed to like the study of her small pale face. It puzzled him to decipher what he saw there. In truth, he saw nothing, unless he were wizard enough to detect a poignant wish, a powerful longing that the cable car would never stop anywhere, but to go on and on with her forever.